Ladies and gentlemen, it looks like Andrew Yang might have just saved democracy. Let's talk about it. So, for those of you who do not know, Andrew Yang the other day decided to initiate a lawsuit against the state of New York for canceling, I should say, because I'm gonna put quotations and you'll understand in a second why I say that. But they canceled the New York primary. But what they really did was take candidates who had declared that they were dropping out of the race or suspending their campaign until the convention, and they took them off the ballot. The state of New York did this, not the Democratic Party of New York. And so it was very, very controversial. Now, of course, the state of New York cited the coronavirus, but Andrew Yang and many other people, like, I don't know, the entire country are looking kind of side-eyed at the method that they used to take these candidates off the ballot and their reasoning. So let's look at this case. Essentially what happened was that Judge Annalisa Torres ruled that the Democratic primary elections for the presidential side must take place on June 23rd, which overruled the decision made by New York that the primary was where the primary was originally supposed to take place in May. Now, what started the case was that Andrew Yang sued on behalf of himself and Bernie Sanders, claiming that it was undemocratic and it was a violation of constitutional rights, which of course I agree with that. Now, the Attorney General's arguments that were made on behalf of the state of New York were absolutely atrocious. Like, it might make you a little sick to your stomach, but one of the main arguments they made sounds good. It sounds like the morally altruistic argument to make, but in my humble opinion, this is becoming a growing pattern with not only the Democratic Party, but the left. They pretend to make these arguments and decisions based on good intentions. They appeal to your emotions. They appeal to your goodwill. They also appeal to the fear porn that we've all been ingesting from the mainstream media. But they don't ever argue any logical reason or actually think about the implications or engage in any of the substantive issues like surrounding the case. So the state argues the state will be required to deploy thousands of workers who will be interacting with the numerous members of the public in the midst of what is still an unprecedented health crisis in the nationwide epicenter of that crisis. That's what the Attorney General Conrad said. Now, he goes on to say that there's very simply demanding that the lives of New Yorkers be put at risk for the sake of an uncontested election. Conrad pointed to a requirement that to bring the suit, the plaintiffs would need they would need evidence with a strong showing of irreparable harm that simply doesn't exist, he said. So he just argued two things. The burden for the plaintiffs, which would be Andrew Yang and his attorney, would be to argue that there is irreparable harm. Just out of curiosity, if we don't have if you are a Bernie Sanders delegate or Andrew Yang delegate who wants to see Medicare for all, single payer healthcare on the platform, who wants to see delegates who wants to get rid of super delegates completely and totally, who wants to have UBI on the platform, who wants to, there are various things that delegates vote for. They vote with, they help vote for the Democratic National Chairman. Like, there's a lot of different things that delegates vote for and have control over. Now, New York itself has 400 delegates, ladies and gentlemen. You don't think that getting all of those delegates, handing them to Joe Biden, knowing that these delegates would essentially, they would be partial to the establishment and what the establishment wants, correct? Okay, cool. So wouldn't that potentially lead to irreparable harm in the future, depending on how things roll downhill? It's not a hard argument to make if you're an attorney who's had weeks to prepare for this argument. Now, their other argument is a little bit interesting because they essentially rely on the fear of what coronavirus might become and what it could do and what it could lead to if they were to engage in a primary. But we're going to talk about that, just how nonsensical that argument is based off of the case. But first, let's just address the coronavirus itself, right? So I think that argument is nonsensical. And I'm going to tell you why. Do you know at the height of the flu season, hundreds of thousands of people die every year, right? In New York specifically, 4,519 people died in 2017 alone. New York has the 10th highest rate of death for the flu. It's never stopped them from holding elections. And to be quite frank, they've never even decided to take precautions to ensure that the people who are most vulnerable and susceptible to dying from the flu are not put in harm's way. And that includes their workers. Correct? Correct. Now, I know what some people might argue. Oh, well, there's a vaccine. Well, that doesn't really help the scenario because there's a vaccine and 519 people still died. And it did not stop them completely and totally from holding a presidential primary election. Now, for the coronavirus, there are 20,000 deaths that have been attributed to the coronavirus. But the problem is the requirement for a death to be attributed to the coronavirus is much looser than the requirement for a death to be attributed to the flu. In other words, if I caught the flu, but a doctor determined that I also had coronavirus, but I actually died from the flu, they would still attribute it to the coronavirus. Now, this is according to the public health officials. These are the ones who have made these definitions. If I don't know, if I had cancer and I died from cancer while I had the coronavirus, even if I was just carrying it and wasn't experiencing any symptoms, it would be called a coronavirus death, not a cancer death. So these numbers are clearly inflated to a degree. But the moral of the story is we don't even know how many of those deaths are still including the flu. But once again, there was no precaution ever made, no argument ever made that there should be a precaution made or that primaries should be postponed or eliminated based off of deaths for the flu, which New York, once again, has the 10th highest rate of death for the flu in the entire country, and there's already a flu vaccine. So that's a nonsensical argument to make here. There are precautions you could take. Workers could still social distance themselves. Mail-in ballots are going to be used on June 23rd for their local and state primaries, which we're going to get to in a second. So you can use mail-in ballots and disinfect them accordingly. There are plenty of precautions and steps you could take to ensure that you are putting forth your best effort to make sure nobody gets infected. Okay? That's stupid. It's a stupid argument. Not to mention that argument in and of itself kind of ignores the rest of the facts of the case. It's a self-defeating argument. Do you know why? Guess why? It's only the presidential primaries that were canceled. Did y'all know that? Only the likes of Bernie Sanders, Andrew Yang, and other presidential candidates who announced that they would no longer be participating in the primary. In other words, they suspended their campaign. Suspending your campaign is, yes, technically dropping out, but the reason they use the specific word suspending is because you still want to have leverage at the Democratic National Convention. Now, their argument for the safety and the well-being of this country, or that state, could be taken more seriously if you weren't still holding a primary for the local and state and congressional elections on June 23rd. People. They're still holding a primary. They were just going to take the presidential candidates off. And speaking of irreparable harm, if you're a candidate like Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang that has galvanized a new sect of candidates, which means you've galvanized a whole new type of voters. You've got a different type of voters or a different subsection of voters to register for the first time who would obviously be supporting these candidates. There are a lot of people who will not be elected or not even have a chance to win their primary if Bernie Sanders and Andrew Yang are not on the ballot, or if people are convinced that there is no primary, because for the most part, most of the people that I've talked to or seen talking about this were under the impression that all of the primary was canceled, not just the presidential primary. In fact, even the attorney general who was arguing on behalf of the state of New York is like talking as if the entire primary is canceled, and that's not the case. Now, people believing that the entire primary is canceled and no one actually updating people that that's not the case could lead to down ballot races being detrimentally affected, especially if you are a progressive. It just is stupid. It's ridiculous to make the argument if you're going to still hold like, so yeah, no, I just want like I pontificate about like the how New York has not actually taking any precautions during other situations where if a lot of people are infected and vulnerable people are infected, they could die. I know that's a good argument, but it doesn't even matter because that argument is stupid considering the fact they were going to hold primaries anyway. They were just getting rid of the presidential primaries and effectively giving Joe Biden 400 delegates. Yeah. If you've ever wondered if they're full of it, here's more proof for you. Now, I want to take a look really quick at the judge's argument because the judge's argument is beautiful. And the reason that I said that Andrew Yang might have saved democracy, even if only accidentally, is because of the judge's opinion as to why she overturned New York's ruling to cancel that primary. Now, the judge said, one, there's enough time before the primary, or there was enough time before the primary in May to schedule figure out how the schedule should work, take precautions to make sure the primaries are safe, et cetera, et cetera. And of course, once again, they made a legitimate argument as to why the primary should perhaps be postponed, maybe until June 23rd, like they already planned on doing for every other primary in the state. However, their argument is not substantive enough to address why it should be completely and totally canceled, knowing that it will have an effect on the entire platform of the Democratic Party. Now, the judge also says in her opinion, the court concludes that plaintiffs and plaintiff interveners have shown a clear and substantial likelihood of success on the merits of their claim that the Democratic commissioners' April 27th resolution removing Yang and Sanders and 8 other Democratic presidential candidates from the ballot deprived them of associational rights under the First and the 14th Amendments. In other words, they're suppressing the free speech of presidential candidates and free speech of the voters. And once again, the argument that is not discussed enough, delegates are oftentimes selected or elected to go and represent these people. Now, in the representative democracy, less so now, but especially when it was first created. In representative democracy, delegates are like Congress people to a degree on a smaller scale. They're supposed to be representative of the people who vote for them, right? And effectively, if you're voting for Sanders, you're voting for delegates. Now, granted, different states select delegates differently, but long story short, delegates are affected. People who, I was banking on being a Sanders delegate, or I was banking on being an Andrew Yang delegate, and I really wanted to go and influence the outcome of the platform. If Joe Biden wins, I have a 0% chance of being a delegate. 0. Unless I'm a Joe Biden fan. And I'm a party operative, effectively. That's the only way you would be able to be a delegate. So he's silencing your opportunity to exercise your First Amendment right to free speech, of course. And of course, your 14th Amendment, which is, if I recall, the right to vote. So, this case is also huge because it actually changes precedents. How so? Well, this case dealt a serious blow to a previous Supreme Court ruling where Scalia wrote a dissenting opinion that basically detailed the gist of how all the other judges felt. No individual is entitled to the right of a fair and objective primary process. This opinion was regarding a case discussing whether or not judges or judge candidates had the right to be a part of a fair primary process rather than the Democratic Party of New York selecting their judge, because the Democratic Party of New York was literally leaving people off the ballot so they didn't have any chance to win. Now, if you understand how judges work, that's very, very problematic for a lot of reasons, because one, judges aren't supposed to belong to political parties. They're not supposed to be propped up by specific political parties. They're supposed to be impartial, even if on the surface, they're supposed to be impartial. But when one party apparatus is literally preventing judges from even appearing on the ballot and having a chance to run in the general election, then you have a problem, right? So that ruling in and of itself was very bad, but they got all the judges agree unanimously. However, this ruling challenges that precedence, essentially saying, no, you cannot just decide how, especially the state, right? But it's saying basically Democratic primaries are protected under the First and 14th Amendments. That's massive, for not only for New York people, for everybody. How many times have we all heard the quote from the DNC fraud lawsuit, which most of you are familiar with at this point? Oh, well, we can select our opponents in a smoke-filled room and the people can't do anything about it. Now, Judge Locke's opinion there also, although we had it dismissed for jurisdictional reasons, in his opinion, he made sure to address that point and said that he does not recognize the trivialization of the DNC's charter, which says that they do have to behave objectively and even-handedly, by counsel, what's his name? Bruce Spiva, that's his name. The federal judge in the DNC fraud lawsuit didn't even support that. Okay? Fast forward, that's two judges now saying that you can't just do what the hell you want to simply because you're a non-profit 501c4 organization that considers yourself a private entity. That's massive. Now, what does that mean potentially for the DNC fraud lawsuit? Because I believe that this potentially does have implications on the lawsuit going forward, especially because right now we're being, we submitted just, May 26th, I think, writ of certiorari to the Supreme Court, waiting to figure out if we're going to be able to amend our opinion so we can go back and argue our case at the federal level. The short answer is there will absolutely be implications on this, on the DNC fraud lawsuit. It will absolutely have implications on it. New York effectively tried to use the government to crush potential presidential candidates, but not only the candidates, but delegates as well. And of course, there would have been a resonant effect on the down ticket candidates, congressional candidates, local candidates, judges, commissioners, supervisors in New York. I mean, there's a lot of elected positions in New York, right? Judge Torres says that the fair process is protected by the First and 14th Amendments. Plus, these elections are also publicly funded. I don't know if you all know that. These elections have, at least in part, funding from both the federal and state governments, which means these elections, at least in part, are funded by your tax dollars. At least in part. Which means if you can experience the benefits of participating in democracy, then you are also subject to the penalties that come from violating democracy. And of course, you are also subject to the rules that uphold democracy as well. So in other words, the Democratic Party cannot just do what the hell it wants to do. It's not how life works anymore, although I know the Democratic Party would like to think life works like that. Judge Torres, I don't know why y'all, listen, I live in Miami. We have a whole slew of female judges, and I don't understand why the female judges just get it right almost like all the time. They come in and swoop in and save the day all the time. I think they just think, they're not thinking with their egos, to be honest with you, especially if they're, younger. But the DNC fraud lawsuit, could have had a major boost with arguments presented for us through this opinion by Judge Torres. So it's huge all around. So the last thing I want to talk about is Andrew Yang and his willingness to push for this case, because let's be honest, people, Bernie Sanders delegates and the Bernie Sanders wing of the Democratic Party is going to benefit the most from this decision when, once again, you're talking about 500 delegates or 400 delegates up for grabs. This state, before the COVID-19 situation, before everything had gone down, Bernie was going to win New York pretty handedly, just like he won California pretty handedly, even with all the election riggings, even with the electronic voting machines, even with that the provisional ballot situation where votes were effectively being taken away from him. He still won California. He was going to win New York. He was going to get a lot of delegates from New York. Even after that, though, with this situation, he was still going to get a lot of delegates because his wing of the party is just the most energized wing. They're the most energized wing. Now, election fraud notwithstanding, Andrew Yang's move benefited nobody more than Bernie Sanders and the platform of Bernie Sanders and the delegates who would be representing Bernie Sanders. And it is unfortunate, in my opinion, that Bernie himself would not bring this case forward. I've said time and time again, the most frustrating thing about Bernie 2020 is that when you raise hundreds of millions of dollars, how do you not have a lawyer in every single major primary state? How do you have to have lawyers in California, New York, Florida, Texas, even Michigan, Washington, and probably Illinois too, just because they have a lot of rigging. You have to. You have to have arguments ready. You have to be figuring out, okay, how has election fraud been practiced in the past? And how do we combat it? Because we know we're going to have to deal with it. Especially if you're talking about states where Bernie won in 2016. Or he was picked to win by 20-something points. I remember in Texas, he was picked to just destroy it, and he was. They actually had declared initially that Bernie was about to win Texas, and then it flipped. How do you not have an attorney there? How are you not challenging these clearly corrupt processes? And the argument is that, or what it seems that the argument is for Bernie, is that he just doesn't want to challenge the party. Doesn't want to stir up a ruckus. Well, although I have my differences with Andrew Yang stirring up a ruckus the way he did and responding to his people, because his people were just as pissed as Bernie's people. And he has far less support than Bernie does. But they were still just as pissed. And Andrew Yang was still fervent in his resolve. And now, not only are we seeing the positive effects on the New York ballot, we're going to see positive effects at the convention potentially. This could have a positive effect on future cases where the DNC is being accused of electioneering and election rigging. And it was done by Andrew Yang, who has, once again, far less resources than Bernie Sanders does. Which is a little frustrating. It's a little frustrating. Even when I disagree with Andrew Yang, even with my disagreements with him, those disagreements would lead me to believe that he would be less likely to do this. So if Andrew Yang can do this, why not Bernie? I'm confused. If Andrew Yang showed resolve here, how come Bernie couldn't? You gotta wonder, people. You gotta wonder. I feel like that's a pretty valid question to ask, though. So, with that being said, ladies and gentlemen, I would love to know what your thoughts or opinions are about this. Like this video, share this video, leave a comment below. Make sure you hit that subscribe button. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace. If you like that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa, don't forget to like the video and smash that subscribe button. Want access to members only live streams, behind the scenes footage, and other premium content? Well, you can endorse us on Rockfin Premium, become a patron through Patreon, or you can sign up for the MCSC Premium membership through YouTube. All the links are in the description below. But hey, more than anything else, always remember,
Find your balance.
Find your balance.
Find your balance.
Find your balance. Find your balance.
Find your balance. Find your balance.
Always remember, more than anything else, find your balance.
peace.